Mr. President, since this administration, the Biden administration, came into office, I and a number of senators, Democrats and Republicans, have been trying to work with them on a number of important foreign policy issues, particularly as it relates to China. The president is now in Europe, and a couple days ago he wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post where he stated that the United States must lead the world from positions of strength. By the way, his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, also has made this argument. It's actually a really good argument that the United States needs to lead the world, particularly competition with countries like Russia and China, from positions of strength. Now, Mr. President, I couldn't agree with that more. But let me just talk about two areas where we have strength relative to any other country in the world, and where this administration is not reinforcing that, but is undermining it. And I really, really hope that they change. Let me begin by the obvious one in terms of our foreign relations and national security, the United States military. We have a position of strength. There's no doubt about it. We have the finest fighting force in the world, maybe in the history of the world. We need to continue to lead with strength and value the men and women who raise their right hand and volunteer for this incredible fighting force. Not with words, Mr. President, but most important, with actions and with funding. And here's where this administration is clearly missing the mark. This is a breakdown of the Biden administration's blowout $6 trillion budget. And as you can see, Mr. President, it lays out priorities. And I think we can all agree that if you look at this chart, the military and national defense are simply not priorities. To the contrary, they are dead last in terms of this administration's priorities. Look at this. Every agency you can imagine, Commerce, HHS, EPA, Interior, they're double-digit, 20% or more increases in their budget. Where are the two national security agencies in the Biden administration's priorities? They're down here. Actually, we say a 2% increase in defense, a 0.2% increase in homeland security, but inflation is now estimated at 4.2%. So the numbers here are actually declines. Inflation-adjusted decreases in the Department of Defense's budget and Homeland Security's budget. Dead last. Now, Mr. President, we had an Armed Services hearing today with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Two gentlemen I have a lot of respect for. They have a tough job because they had to come up to the Hill and pitch this budget when I believe they didn't agree with that budget. I don't think Secretary Austin and General Milley want to cut defense spending, but guess what? That's what they had to pitch today. And in the hearing, I asked them this question. Budgets are a reflection of an administration's priority. If you look at this chart, it is clear that the Biden administration prioritizes defense spending and our military and our national security last, dead last. So my question to them was, how can you tell our troops that we are prioritizing their mission, defending America, when it is clear, again, from this document and from the Biden administration's budget that it's dead last? To be respectful to General Milley and Secretary Austin, they didn't have a very good answer because there's no good answer. There's no good answer. But we know that one country is prioritizing their defense spending. I also, Mr. President, showed General Milley and Secretary Austin this chart. This chart, if you look at it, is where the United States annual change in defense spending is. That's the blue. And where the Communist Party of China's annual defense spending is, that's the red. And again, if you take a look, these big declines here, that's the second term of the Obama administration, where they cut defense spending in the United States by 25%. Not good for our troops. The increases here when the Republicans had control of the United States Senate during the Trump administration era, when we were increasing our defense spending and increasing readiness. And now we're starting to go back to the previous Biden-Obama era of cutting defense spending. What have the Chinese been doing? Every year, at least 6%, sometimes 12, 13%. Again, Mr. President, this is not being from a position of strength for the United States, as the President of the United States says we must. Let me just make one final point in another area in terms of a position of strength. One of the other areas of our country's strength right now, and nobody disagrees with it, is in the area of energy. In the last 10 years, we've had an energy renaissance in our country, turning us into a true global superpower of energy. Largest producer of natural gas in the world, bigger than Russia. Largest producer of oil in the world, bigger than Saudi Arabia. Largest producer of renewables in the world. All of the above. Our country has been trying to get to this point where we are the world's energy superpower. Again, we were in this position during World War II for the last several decades. And Mr. President, this has always been a bipartisan endeavor. Jimmy Carter wanted energy independence, and so did every other president before and after him. And we're there. But Mr. President, we are on the cusp of seeing an enormous strategic advantage to our nation, to working families, to our environment disappear. Why? Because the Biden administration is restricting energy production in America, is having senior officials like John Kerry and Gina McCarthy go to Wall Street, tell our Wall Street executives don't invest in the energy sector, and they're stopping the permitting of pipelines where we need to move our energy. In fact, the president is fine with killing the Keystone Pipeline and the 10,000 jobs that go with it, but is approving the Russian Nord Stream pipeline. That is a gift to President Putin. Mr. President, there was a Wall Street Journal editorial today that I'd like to submit for the record entitled, "America's Energy Gift to Dictators."
Without objection.
And here's how this excellent editorial begins. Quote, "The U.S. is barreling towards one of the greatest self-inflicted wounds in our country's history." Mr. President, I could not agree more. The editorial goes on to list the different actions that I just mentioned, restricting energy production in America, including in Alaska with ANWR, restricting pipelines, encouraging defunding of the energy sector, and it's not good for the country. And the editorial also notes that this will have no impact on global greenhouse gas emissions. None. None. It's virtue signaling at the expense of working families, working Americans, and our national security. Right now, we are beginning to import more oil from Russia than we ever have. How does that make any sense? How does that help a working family in Alaska or Maryland or anywhere? It doesn't. It does one thing. It empowers countries like Russia and Putin and Saudi Arabia at the expense of the United States. This is a fact. And yet, every day, you hear a new action. You read a new quote from someone in this administration focused on killing the energy sector of the United States. Again, as the Wall Street Journal just mentioned, this will be recognized in history as one of the greatest self-inflicted wounds with no upside. No upside. We have the highest environmental standards in the world in Alaska when we produce oil. Highest in the world. Russians have the lowest. And yet we're now preferring Russian oil over American oil. Can anyone tell me how this makes sense? It doesn't. Here's how the editorial concludes. Quote, progressives want to surrender one of America's most strategic economic advantages in the name of so-called saving the climate. But banishing fossil fuels in the United States won't eliminate carbon emissions, which will just be produced elsewhere. So will jobs and economic growth and the geopolitical advantage that comes with our energy dominance. Mr. President, let me conclude by saying this. As I mentioned, I agree with President Biden, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. We need to address challenges, particularly with our adversaries like China and Russia, from positions of strength. In two of the most prominent positions of strength, the U.S. military and our energy dominance right now are being undermined by this very administration. They need to change course, and if they do, we will support their actions. I yield the floor.